Hello. It gives me great pleasure as chair of Schola Gregoriana to introduce this series of conversations, I hope, about Gregorian chant with our director, Iain Simcock. Iain, welcome. Um, Iain, perhaps the first question I should ask is, since there may be some people who are not very clear about what this is all about, is perhaps I should ask, what is Gregorian chant? Quick summary, if you can, and perhaps more importantly, what is its relevance to us today?
Well, Gregorian chant is the short answer is it's the official music of the liturgy of the Roman Catholic Church. And that unique position is still the case today. Might astonish many to hear that. But in Vatican II documents, the Gregorian chant is still clearly expressed as being the preferred chant of the church, preferred music of the church. That's one answer. The second answer necessitates a little walk back through history. Gregorian chant was, of course, originally called plain chant. Its association with Pope Gregory came later, and indeed part of that is legend and part of that is fact and supported by historical documents. So there's a lot going on, but the most important thing to say about Gregorian chant is that it is, as begins St. John's Gospel, in the beginning was the Word. And as far back as the famous Roman orator Cicero, we hear about the inherent song, music in the word. So the inflected Latin language carries its own music, and he and other specialists of oratory declamation take this to a very refined point of interpretation, shall we say. So the declamation of the word is inherently a musical thing and should be mastered. So this was, studying rhetoric was very much a norm in education. In fact, in some countries up to around the 18th century. So that's the first thing. So the music evolved with the liturgy as the Christian church began to spread throughout the Mediterranean basin and up through Europe over the course of I suppose from around the 3rd century when the persecutions stopped, the speed with which it progressed and the speed with which basilicas were built, the speed with which the liturgical requirements and the liturgy, the form of liturgy itself, evolved was really remarkable, and the music evolved with it, hand in hand. So it's hard for us now to think in these terms, but we need to remember that rather than taking a text, as a composer would today, and saying, what music should I write to this text? What music brings out this or that? This is the text that evolves with the music and its liturgy as one unity. And that is the strength and power of Gregorian chant. And the liturgical reforms that we have undergone, I mentioned Vatican II, that's the Second Vatican Council, that is obviously the most important of those reforms, does in no way diminish, as I said, the relevance and importance of chant.
And I mentioned Schola Gregoriana at the beginning of our conversation. So, what's the point of us? If you
So, well, of course, with the Second Vatican Council and some would say, erroneous interpretations of its aims. Came a perceived need for new music set to texts that were different. The change was colossal, of course. And for many, they couldn't see how Gregorian chant would or could fit into this. And it also, it was, as they say, the zeitgeist, or the l'air du temps. It was a very liberal time, the 1960s. And the church, sadly, was not unaffected by that in all kinds of ways. But for now, a bit staying on topic, Schola Gregoriana was created by Dr. Mary Berry, who, of course, was a religious. She had her religious vocation, and she was authorized by her community to live her vocation, as it were, outside, extramuros of the community, and to work to promote the continued use of the music of the church, Gregorian chant, in the liturgy. And of course, she was a remarkable figure, astonishingly charismatic, very good at persuading people, and very gifted in every sense. So she could create a colossal energy around and through recordings and chant days, chant events. She would do remarkable work bringing this music to life for generations that might not otherwise have come across it. And we are continuing her work today. Now, she founded Schola Gregoriana in the 1970s, and I think particularly at that time, slightly turbulent time, there was a great need for the kind of stability that she brought. Now, of course, the parameters changed slightly. Simply put, under Pope Francis, grew the tensions around the old rite versus the new rite. And whereas in the old rite, Gregorian chant is preeminent and doesn't, it is the music of the church. Since the reform, we're faced with showing people how can you, in the new rite, still use the chant in such a way that everybody can feel part of it. So our job is very simple, really, in one sense. You can go to places today and take part in a new rite mass. The most obvious place I can think of, which will perhaps come up several times in this conversation, is the Abbey of Solesmes, famous for the astonishing work they did on the restoration of the chant itself. Colossal work. But also a monastery that has adopted the new rite, and came under some criticism, I think unjustifiably so, but nevertheless under some criticism for doing that. But integrating all of the chants in the monastic day, just as it would be in a monastery that sings in the old rite. It's worth reminding people that Solesmes is a congregation of Benedictine monks that comprises, I can't remember off the top of my head exactly how many, but a large number of monasteries across many continents. And I think, so Fontevraud, I don't mean Fontevraud, I mean Fontevraud, forgive me, is part of the Solesmes congregation, but it uses the old rite. So that Solesmes took a very, I think, pragmatic, but also and spiritually enlightened approach within its congregation, having both rites and showing how the chant was the perfect music for both.
Yes, you just mentioned a little earlier about Mary, and I know you've done some videos already, as for instance with Jeremy, with his recollections of Mary. So that's worth perhaps viewers going back to. And you've mentioned the CDs, and of course those are still available today. I'd like to come back to Salem for a moment, if I may, because of course of your particular um, well, your particular history there. Perhaps you spent many years at Salem. You have experienced how you've just been talking about how the new rite can perfectly easily accommodate chant as an integral part of the liturgy. And I think you feel that Salem is particularly good at that. And your years of experience at Salem might help you to expound on that a little more.
Yes, I think the reason I refer to that is, well, first and foremost, it's great if people can go to Salem. It's very easily on the holiday routes of anyone who's going through France, just as it is just off the autoroute A6 or A11, I can't remember. Anyway, it's very easy to make a detour to Salem, and it's a very small and sleepy village, if you will, but has this astonishingly huge fortress of a monastery there that I was fortunate to be involved in the celebrations of the millennium of that monastery, and that's not something you do very often in your life, so that was a particular privilege. But when I was playing the organ there, um, you know, on two occasions, 1994, 95, and then again in 2000 and whatever it was, 14, for the entire liturgical years, you you obviously get to see and experience how the chant, particularly the first time I was there in 94, I'd been at Westminster Cathedral until then, and had been therefore in a very different type of musical situation. And going to the monastic world of Salem was very revealing and showed many aspects to me that I was sadly unaware of before. So, and I think also the reason I mention Salem, and we'll talk perhaps about Le Barou as well, which is another Benedictine monastery in Provence, which uses the old rite exclusively. That these monasteries, although they're not in the same congregation of Benedictines, they're very friendly and are in very regular contact, and they, when I go to Le Barou, they talk so admiringly of Solem and of the beauty of his liturgy. So there you are. I think it's important at this stage to say that Schola Gregoriana per se is not in its sort of statutes or raison d'etre, at least I think, part of the politicized battles that can go on within the church with regard to that. So I try to position myself outside of that rather than, I'd hate someone to think, oh, well, if we ask Schola Gregoriana to do something, they're just trying to get us back to doing the old rite. And we really are totally neutral when it comes to, at least that's my position. It's simply that I've had the most prayerful and deeply moving privileges at both Solem and at Le Barou. And the only thing that really matters is the depth of one's own Christian faith, and that's the be all and end all of it, really.
And I mean, we will come on to Le Barou perhaps in a moment. Just to stay on Salem for a moment. You have talked in the past, I think, about some of the great musician monks there, some of the great work that Salem has done in the 19th century and indeed in the 20th, and gave us a new insight perhaps into chant and how we might be singing it. And you developed quite a close collaboration with people like Doms Daniel Saunier and indeed Dom Jean Clair.
Absolutely. In fact, I was watching an old film of both talking about the chant earlier today, which gave me huge pleasure. Yes. So obviously with the chant, there are many, many aspects. There's the historical one, how it was originally, of course, an oral tradition. And because we're talking about music that started, well, it started at the time of Christ, of course. There's a lot we don't know. We can make educated hypotheses, and in many cases they are very probable. But we see a development of music, as I said earlier, with the liturgy, and it took on. It was an oral tradition. We couldn't write down music back in those days, you know, and indeed, when I think a key moment came when there was a confrontation between, or perhaps it's not the word, an amalgamation, fusion between Roman chants and Gallican chants, which produced a sort of métissage, as the French say, a kind of mixity, a hybrid result. The Gallican chant, famous for its perhaps ornamental style, but of course the Roman chant, this time of Pepin, is it Pepin the Short, we say in English, Pepin le Bref, and his son Charlemagne, initially for political reasons, but then for good Catholic reasons. The liturgy became slightly more centralized. The liturgical books from Rome, which could be written down, the text, of course, meant that will have dominated. And then the Gallican chant, with its ornamental style, also contributed to this. I'm saying all this because it's certainly Don Jean Clair, who was a remarkable choir master at Solesmes for many years, and Daniel Saunier, who's a very clear thinking and clear speaking scholar, very intelligent man. And then, as you rightly said, there were many at Solesmes. They helped me on a personal level so much that it was a special bond. Jean Clair, in fact, used to say mass for me before on solemnities and Sundays. We'd have mass, just the two of us, which was extraordinary, at 8 o'clock in the morning, and that meant that we were free, he with the choir and me at the organ, to be somewhat, I don't want to say distracted, but when you have a particular function in the liturgy, you also need the interiority, the contemplation, as if you didn't have a special burden of responsibility.
Yeah, now, that's a great privilege, and actually, there's a good reminder in there that there is a difficulty sometimes. We have to ensure that, you know, when we're singing, when we're serving, or whatever, we have a special duty, don't we, to support the liturgy. But of course, sometimes that can mean that we must also remain prayerful about it as much as we can.
Yes, in fact, before I forget, because I forget everything these days, I'll take this opportunity you've reminded me that you can always tell when a choir singing chant, I said choir, schola, whatever, when it's a group of professionals with very, fine, refined voices and, professional singers as one. It's very hard to obtain the same caressing beauty of the chant with its text in the liturgical context, as you can hear when you go to Solesmes or to Le Baron, where there's an emotion and I would say it translates as a musical sophistication. Those of us who are musicians we have words to say, oh yes, a slight rubato here, a slight diminuendo there, a slight easing up here, whatever it is, moving forwards there, and a crescendoing up the line here. All of these things, ways in which we can analyze why something is beautiful. Uh, one has to remember these monks are not musicians primarily. They love the chant because it's part of their liturgy. It's just who they are, and that is the mystical, one of the many mystical joys of monastic vocations. Certainly, that anyway they can produce a result with the chant. If you offered me all the singers of a great opera house or whatever, or the monks at the Barrow, I'd take that. I'd take the monks every time because they can just breathe so much. And the reason I make that remark, and no offence to professional singers, who of course back in the day, the Schola Cantorum, was a group of specialist singers. They were very proud of their art and did it certainly with great skill. But nevertheless, I think what we're concerned with here is how the chant became the chant for all within the church. And it was curious to me that reading through some of the Second Vatican Council documents, talking about participation and da 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 da, and well, the Gregorian chant has all of those qualities. In fact, I can think of no music that better embodies the desire of the church to be inclusive and everything, because it can be sung by all. And the efforts required, because anything takes effort, as you mentioned, Jeremy White, who was one of my predecessors following Mary Berry's death.
He was the first director after Mary.
Was, yes, sort of anointed by her, yes, quite. And but as he said, everything's new to everybody once, whatever it is. And actually, some of the jazzy, really rather disappointing music that was hurriedly written following the Second Vatican Council is harder to pick up in many respects. The only reason it feels easier is that it's in the vernacular, so let's say in English or French or whatever, and that it's in a kind of folky style, which of course that's the other thing that's a great shame, because it is a break with something that had been preserved even through early polyphony, through to some extent, where the style of the music, the sort of ethos, the ethos of the music, was indissociable with its liturgy. It was the style of music of the liturgy, and it best enabled us to contemplate the Word of God. There we are. It says it all.
Just perhaps you've mentioned about participation. It's a good moment just to think about what now we should be doing as the Schola. What is our role now?
Well, our role is to be available to people. It's to help, and I always loved these chant days we do. Over the years, quite a lot of them. We often think, oh, it's a shame there aren't more of them. But over the years, they slowly sort of stack up, don't they? And it's a joy to go around the country and to help to give people that feeling, because many don't have it. We're getting to the stage now where just about where people can go through an entire average lifespan without having come across Gregorian chant as a Roman Catholic.
Terrible as
that is a very sad situation to be in, because it is one of the glories of our heritage, of our Catholic heritage. So we have to be available to people, to give them that joy, and also to help the clergy, because also it's the same for some priests now. Of course, there are a lot of younger clergy who are returning to the tradition in a very wonderful way, and that's gives us all much optimism and joy. But there's still, I heard the other day, nothing to do with the church, but talking about the boomer generation. I think some political thing around. But the question of which I suppose we are part. So we're the old bulls who remained faithful to the tradition, but everyone else wants to break out of every constraint and kick over the traces of the past and do new things. That's a caricature, of course, but our role anyway is to help the clergy with singing the mass, and of course, people who aren't brought up to sing as just an inherent part of one's being as a human condition are often very nervous about any form of singing at all. And yet that argument seems to me to weaken when I hear people happily all chanting along,
Yes.
doing in football stadiums or whatever it is. So anyway, the instinct of singing is part of who we are.
Yes.
And therefore unlocking that and making everyone feel at ease in singing the chant as part of their worship,
Yes.
as the inherent part, that it takes them to the special place where they can feel the presence of God in this soul, is something that is, and of course, once you've got it, it's such a richness, you know. I almost feel that if ever I'm having a bad day or not, something has disturbed me, it can take just a few notes of a piece of chant to connect back with, you know, one talks about spiritual. You have to forgive me. A lot of my Catholic education was in French, and therefore I don't necessarily. I'm sometimes translating, and sometimes therefore sound a bit hesitant or lumpy, ungainly in my translations. But what the French call sécheresse spirituelle, spiritual dryness, is where you feel that despite your daily efforts, that faith feels further from you, God feels further from you, and there are moments where and it's hard. Well, the chant is an amazing way of connecting us back to the special joy of intimacy with God.
That's a wonderful way of putting it. And indeed, we have found, haven't we, on our chant days, that people come along a little nervous sometimes, and they write to me and say, you know, will I be able to manage this? And very often they come along and are delightfully surprised, actually, singing with others, and there there are always going to be more experienced singers as there. And you mentioned our chant days. We have quite a number coming up at the moment, so obviously it's always, sorry, this sounds like a plug, but it's always worth people looking at our website and finding what the next chant days are. Iain, we're going to need to come back again, I think, because
time flies. We philosophized a lot, and
that's been
next time we must talk about specific pieces.
Oh, how wonderful that would be! Yes. Yeah. So, in the meantime, Iain, that was absolutely delightful. Thank you very much indeed.
Take care, Alan. All the best. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye.